Mr. Llamas, let me begin with you. You have raised this issue on ward leaders. Tell us a bit more about how this works. I mean, when did this start? How pervasive is this among current candidates?
It's a convergence of technology. It's a convergence of political strategy. And it's a convergence, in a way, of the pandemic. No, everybody is at home for the past 2 years. No, so yung traditional ward leader system, usually mga operators sa barangays, pinalitan na sila ng mga influencers, no? Mga bloggers, at to a great extent trolls, no? Who dominate social media. Kaya sila na yung these trolls do not only peddle information. These bloggers and influencers do not only build up candidates and political narratives. No, a lot of them create communities. No, kaya pumasok tayo sa phenomena ng micro-messaging. No, you have one troll taking care of 300, 400 real people, real accounts. No? Sisimulan nila sa mga personal na mga pangangailangan, personal concerns, halimbawa mga overseas Filipinos, kung yung concern nila, doon magsisimula. And dahan-dahan, dadalhin siya sa isang political narrative. No? Halimbawa, before, siguro mga 2018, there's a community tawag nila history of the Philippines, no? Binabalikan yung mga antiques, binabalikan yung mga old places in the 1920s, in the 1930s, in the 1960s. So parang nostalgia. And then in 2021, biglang naging naging history for BBM and Sara, no? So nagbago siya, no? From an innocent history parang blog, history community na merong mga nag-share about 500,000 people ang kasama, it becomes now a tool for a political narrative, no? So ang tanong ay sino nag-regulate niyan? Or can it be regulated? Dahil mismo yung Facebook at saka Twitter 2 years ago, ina-admit nila 3 years ago na they cannot control their own creation, no? Their own technology. No? Dahil ang daming ang daming mga advocacies for privacy, against fake news, no? etc. Kaya itong mga owners nitong mga platforms na ito ay also being pressured to regulate their own creation para less maging fake, mas more maging truthful. Even the United Nations, nakialam eh. Halimbawa, yung pag-deny ng Holocaust that it ever happened, no? Yan, talagang actively kumilos yung Facebook at saka Twitter, no? Because of pressure from the United Nations na tanggalin lahat yung mga narratives that it never happened, no? Sa Pilipinas, meron ding narrative na nangyayari that martial law never happened, or that martial law was the golden age in the Philippines, no? Pero wala pang pandyan, wala pang regulation about that, no? Kaya yun yung kailangan gawin, hindi lamang ng journalists, kung hindi ng mga regulatory bodies ng government, no? How do we control or how do we minimize the use of social media, no? To generate hatred, to generate false narratives, no? To create a culture, no? Different doon sa liberal culture na nakagista natin in a democracy, no? Kaya lumalaki at lumalakas yung mga populist, authoritarian agenda sa social media dahil sa convergence ng technology at saka political strategy.
Before we talk about regulation, in the first place, are we able to identify who these ward leaders are? Are they visible online? Do they work behind the scenes?
Yun nga yung ginawang bagong law, hindi pa siya law, no? Bagong legislation ng House at saka ng Senate. Kung na-monitor nyo, yung SIM, no? They made a law, nagkasundo na sila. Ang kailangan na lang dito signature ng presidente na hindi na pwedeng anonymous, no? Hindi na pwedeng anonymous yung mga vloggers, yung mga gumagamit ng social media. Kailangan ma-register na sila. Even the SIM cards have to be registered. So it is an attempt, no, na tanggalin yung anonymity ng social media. Paano nagagamit yan to peddle fake news? Dahil wala ka accountability, anonymous ka. You can attack anyone without any accountability. No? Meron nga are very violent attacks. No? Talagang bullying, no? Hanggang harassment. No? So ngayon, with this, kung ma-i-implement ng maigi itong law na ito, may hirapan na magtago sa anonymity itong mga taong ito o itong mga vloggers na ito. Actually, in 2018, may attempt na yung Facebook to regulate their own ranks. Kaya pinagbawal na nila yung pagkuha ng information. Mahalaga kasi yung pagkuha ng information. Yun ang ginagamit nitong mga strategies sa social media to influence voters or kung yung mga corporations to influence buyers. No? So may nagsasalubong yung negosyo at saka politika. Yung ibang mga gumagamit niyan ay para ibenta yung kanilang mga produkto at saka services. Pero yung iba, nakita yung potential to influence voters. Kaya yung Facebook is under pressure, no, para pigilan yan. Kaya gumawa sila ng mga privacy rules noong 2018 na pinipigilan yung mga companies at yung mga political parties at other individuals para mag-access ng information. Yan kasi ang ginagamit nila to analyze, halimbawa, voters. Noong 2008, naimbitahan ako sa US para doon sa assessment nila ng election. Nanalo si Obama. Doon ko nakita yung paggamit ng big data, no, para i-assess ang voters, para tignan kung ano yung kanilang mga vulnerabilities. Anong ibig ko sabihin? No? Kumukuha sila ng data sa mga corporations, sa mga insurance, sa Facebook, sa even churches, tapos kina-crunch nila yan to analyze voters. Ano ba ang kanilang kinakatakutan? Ano ba ang kanilang insecurity? Ano ba ang kanilang kinagagalitan? And then they create narratives. They create memes. They create everything to influence that voter. No? Yun yung ginagawa nila. Is that wrong? Is that right? No? Depende. No? Depende kung ano yung towards what agenda at ano yung gagamitin. Diyan kasi nagsisimula yung mga fake news.
We'll talk more about this later. I think that's the phenomenon called micro-targeting, where you directly target certain ads to certain segment. But before we get to that, let me just ask, how pervasive is the use of ward leaders and opinion peddlers among current candidates, and what has been the impact of these ward leaders on the discussions on politics and elections in these elections?
Very pervasive, no? Dahil yung iba nagsimula earlier, several years ago, no? They create a narrative. Some of them even revise history, no? At wala masyado nag-engage, no? Dahil kinakailangan mo ng resources, kinakailangan mo ng machinery, no? Na nagagawa nito. Kaya it is very pervasive. Tapos eventually it will evolve into something else, no? It will evolve into something else. So may stages ka to create your narrative towards halimbawa an election. Halos lahat gumagamit nito ngayon no? Ikaw makikita mo na lang bigla may papasok na meme sa iyong cellphone dahil ang daming mga Pilipino ang may smartphones. no? Halos 79, 80 million out of 110 million population. So yung mga smartphones may access sa Facebook, may access sa Viber, no? May access sa maraming platforms. So biglang pumapasok na lang itong mga narratives na ito, no? Itong mga memes na ito, which create na minsan hindi mo na malaman kung totoo o hindi. Dahil napakabilis ng ating mundo ngayon. So most people don't check whether ito ay totoo o hindi. They just take it at face value. At marami ang naiimpluwensahan. Dito sana yung role ng mga journalists. Dahil nasa media sila. No? Yung sinasabi nila can be multiplied through social media. No? Kahit sabihin mo na 55-60% ang may access sa internet, no? Ang may access sa social media, no? Napakahalaga niyan. Dahil by word of mouth, pinapasa-pasa yan. Halimbawa, merong isang example na merong isang kandidato na may mga ginto at yung ginto hahati-hatiin sa lahat ng tao pag nanalo siya. Tayo, baka pagtawalan natin. Pero most people, no, maraming tao naniniwala doon, no? Naniniwala doon, no? So it's clearly fake news, no? It's clearly catering to the lower impulses of people, no? But it's pervasive. No? Yun ay isang example, no, ng how pervasive it is, no? Yung gumamit ng husto niya, halimbawa sa US, si President Trump, no? Na-maximize niya ng gusto yung Twitter, no, to cut down enemies, no, and build up his own narrative. At since then, dumami yung mga katulad ni Trump who can get away with it, who can get away with fake news, who can talk big, talk about promises, pero hindi naman totoo. No?
Let me go now to Professor Salvosa. Professor Salvosa, some observers have said that opinion peddlers have been dominating online discussions of the elections, particularly in this cycle. Do you agree with that assessment, and what would account for this?
Yeah, I think Mr. Llamas hit the nail right on the head, no, when he said na, this is practically years in the making, no. For example, the history pages that he has been mentioning, no, maraming ganun yung nagpapalit na lang ng pangalan later on. So what we're seeing is that, because of social media, news is being replaced by content, no, kasi yung platform is no longer being confined to the traditional platforms like print, TV, broadcast, no. Ngayon yung dominant platforms, no, can be filled up with content from just anyone, no. So bukod sa Facebook, Twitter, meron na ring TikTok, no. So and then anyone can just do a broadcast there on TikTok and air your opinion every hour, every day, gabi-gabi pwede, no. And maraming nagbibigay ng political content doon, so mga political supporters, mga kamag-anak ng mga kandidato, anyone who wants to be a personality online are able to do will be able to do content. Ngayon ang response ng industriya, I think, has been strong, no. So right now we have two big fact-checking collaborations, right? So one is the check.ph fact-checking collaboration led by the academe and the media, no. So maraming members yan, and they do trainings, no, to basically multiply the number of fact checkers out there. And then there's also yung this fact-checking collaboration, Facts First PH, no, which is an initiative led by Rappler, no. So malaki din yon, no. And this time, I think this election is different because, tama si Mr. Llamas, the tech giants have awakened to their huge responsibility in making sure that information chaos does not influence the result of this election. So they're supporting these initiatives basically, no. Facebook and Google. Ang fear ko lang is that these efforts, despite the earnest desire to really help, and quell this information online, I think magkukulang pa rin ito. Kasi ako lang looking at our own pipeline for yung mga reports of fake news or disinformation. Sobrang dami, Mike. Sobrang dami. No, and minsan nga nakita ko parang nangaasar pa. So yung mga nagpo-post ng mga disinformation, yung alam mo namang hindi totoo. For example, one post that was reported to us was the Eiffel Tower was built by the late dictator in honor of his mother rather. So alam mo, sobrang fake, no? Sobrang fake information, pero it's out there and it's getting shared online. Sobrang dami ng fake information online. And I think hindi na lang siya trabaho ng mga journalists, right? So and that's why I think yung efforts towards media information literacy, fortunately nagsimula na yung MIL education since beginning grade 11 and 12, no? Kasi hindi na lang to trabaho ng journalists talaga. So it's every responsible citizen's duty to spot misinformation, disinformation, fake news online, no, and report it, correct it, whenever he or she sees it.
But are we losing the social media narrative to these opinion peddlers? Are journalists losing out to opinion peddlers?
I would hate to say that we're losing, no. But what I'm saying is we're simply being overwhelmed by it, no? Kasi we have to recognize that we're not the only game in town, no? So makita natin people are spending hours on social media, no? I don't know the exact number of hours, pero I think at least 8 or 11 hours on social media, on the internet every day. That's more than the number of hours they spend on watching the news, for sure, no? And mas exposed sila dun sa mga content creators, no, yung mga gumagawa ng mga videos and opinions, no. It does not necessarily have to be news. It doesn't even have to be entertainment, no. So maaring mga simpleng yung simpleng mga grupo lang na mga common interests, and then tama si Mr. Llamas, papasukan ng mga ng mga simpleng mga narratives until it builds up, no. And alam naman natin yung narrative that's being that they're trying to sustain now, no? That the Marcos regime was really a good and benevolent one, na walang nangyaring mga human rights violations, walang nangyaring corruption, So, but this didn't happen overnight. This was years in the making, no? Yun nga lang, I think we cannot behave like it's normal. Right. So I think we have to institute more fact-checking in the newsroom, be more creative in terms of producing and delivering content. Perhaps translating our outputs, our work into the different languages, the regional languages, para mas maintindihan. Kasi puro tayo English. Balita natin English. Paano yung mga nasa mga regions, no? Ako in my own site nakita ko malakas ang hatak ng mga nasa local languages na content. I think because people are also hungry for information that they can understand, digest, and process. It cannot be business as usual now, no. Yung business as usual natin for the past decade has led to the rise of this fake news and disinformation, misinformation peddlers.
And I guess the proximity of these, for example, localized languages to the very audience itself makes it more compelling. And is that the same reason what makes these TikTokers, for example, or these Facebook posters more accessible to ordinary Filipinos? Because if we look at the figures now, there's a changing habit in today's news consumers. You have more people getting their news online, 87%. Of this number, 72% from social media. Compare that to 61% from TV and 16% from print. And if you look at consumers of social media platforms, you have Facebook and YouTube as the top social media platforms. And of course, we've all heard about news and stories and reports about fake news or misinformation, disinformation on these platforms. So what are the implications of this for you, Professor Salvosa, on the way that the Philippine journalists should do our trade, our industry?
You know, in the Philippines, there are only 3 accredited, IFCN accredited rather, fact-checking organizations. Tatlo lang. No? So, if I may be allowed to name them, ito yung Verifiles Rappler and AFP Agence France Press Philippines. Tatlo lang. But the pipeline of fake news and disinformation is, sobrang dami, sobrang lakas. No? So I think 3 fact checkers is not enough. No? And fortunately, there are efforts to incubate yung mga other fact checking organizations because yung trabaho natin as journalists, hindi na lang pwedeng reporting the news. Hindi na lang pwede 'yon. Kasi we have to accept the fact that fact checking is going to be a part of the routine of all journalists, no. In fact, hindi lang dapat fact checkers, no. So trabaho na natin siyang lahat, no. And we also do that to educate our readers, no. So I hope mas marami pang news organizations that will set up fact checking units. And as I said earlier, no, mas maraming innovative content, mas maraming compelling content, no? Kasi we also have our own social media assets, right? Now, well followed, no? Except that yung ibang mga content creators na masyado silang creative, no? Masyado silang yung may nag-i-inject ng humor, no? It draws attention. It really commands attention, Yung news, I think if we continued producing the news, packaging the news the same manner, eventually baka we might get drowned out by all of these noisy voices on social media platforms. No? We have to find a way, no, to reclaim that space that was taken away from us.
So, Mr. Llamas, let me go back to you. And we've heard Professor Salvosa talk about what journalists should do. But what does this mean, though, for you? What should journalists do to adapt to the changing times? I mean, do you think we should now see journalists dancing on TikTok just to get the message across?
Yeah. Well, this is a huge battle, no? Sabi nga nung iba, it's a post-truth world. No? Truth is no longer truth. It's what troll farms create, what bloggers and influencers create. So this is a very important battle because truth is connected to a lot of things like democracy, like integrity. No? So mahalaga yung sinabi ni Professor na kinakailangan mas dumami ang fact checkers. Pero yan mas defensive. No? You defend truth, no, by checking the lies. Napaka-konti, sabi nga ni Professor, at usually na-overwhelm sila ng dami ng mga bloggers, influencers, troll farms. So sa isang ireklamo mo na platform at i-bring down ng Twitter o kaya ng Facebook, merong 3 na susulpot ulit. So mahalaga yan, dapat paramihin pa, but it's more defensive. So kailangan mo rin ng mas proactive, mas preemptive. Katulad ng ginawang batas ngayon, no? Yung subscribers identity module. So hindi ka na pwedeng magtago sa anonymity. Dapat naka-register ka na. It's a major blow, no? Of course, gagawa sila ngayon ng paraan para malampasan yan. Pero for now, pag yan ay napirmahan, hindi pa kasi pinipirmahan ng presidente, no? Kaya baka hindi umabot sa eleksyon, no? Pag pinirmahan yan, ay malaking tulong yan para i-regulate yung multiverse, no? Yung multiverse na yan, sinasabi nga sa Spider-Man, na things are not what they are, no? Yun yung nangyayari. So dapat may preemptive. 3, kailangan yung mga journalists ay i-regulate yung sarili nila. Minsan kasi nagagamit din sila as instruments of fake news, no? So dapat i-regulate nila, gawa sila ng code or rules na susundin nila at kinakailangan nilang to help create a new culture, no? A truth culture. Paano yung fake news is becoming a culture, no? So dapat meron kang counterculture dito. At dito yung role ng mga journalists dahil whether they like it or not, sila ay mga influencers din. Dapat gamitin nila yung influence nila, no? Not only to check fake news, not only to preempt the creation of fake news, kung hindi create a culture, no? Halimbawa yung mga sumulpot na mga very positive movements like Black Lives Matter, Me Too. These are creations of social media. Ibig sabihin pwede ring positive no? Ang use ng social media. At dito malaki yung role ng mga journalists, ng mga platforms, no, to counter, no, and to create a new narrative. It's a battle of narratives. It's really a virtual war, no? Kaya may mga defeats, may mga successes, no? Halimbawa, yung ginawa ng Facebook tsaka Twitter noong 2018, no? Na to implement the privacy laws na hindi na makakakuha yung mga political parties, yung mga political institutes katulad ng Cambridge Analytica, yung mga corporations, hindi na sila makakakuha ng information sa Facebook para gamitin nila data analytics to analyze their consumers or their voters and to manipulate, no, how they will buy or how they will vote. It's about manipulation, no? So, meron kang fact checkers as a defense, pero meron ka ring mga self-regulation katulad ng Facebook at saka Twitter, at meron ka ring mga gobyerno na pine-penalize, no? Pine-penalize at nag-create ng mga legislations, no, para mapigilan 'yan. Pero sa akin mahalaga rin people like you, no, journalists, get their act together, no? Pag-usapan ito at paano sila magko-coordinate? Paano sila magtutulungan? No? At paano sila magke-create of culture of truth? Because it's a battle between truth and falsehood, no? And at this point, falsehood is gaining ground, no? Is winning, no? It hasn't won, but it's winning because of the resources at play, because of the technology at play, because of the culture being created.
Professor Salvosa, you've mentioned the need for fact checkers, more fact checkers in the media. But by experience, we've also seen how the trolls are actually attacking fact checkers. In fact, the very fact checking report is being attacked. We've seen Rappler being the subject of negative hashtags because of some fact checks that it did on certain candidates. So for you, Professor, how significant should, how important is it for the media to find a way to be able to establish a connection to the audience that goes beyond the connection that these influencers have with their audience? Because some have pointed out an emotional connection is needed, or I don't know if this will also it will help because some of the influencers are personality based. So, for example, you follow a certain person because you like that person. But we all know in journalism, it's not really the personality of the news presenters which is important. It's really the story. So are there changes to the way we present the news that should be introduced to make it more appealing, more than the presentation of these influencers?
I think earlier what I said about MIL being offered in senior high school, I think we have to start earlier. Honest, no, and educate our young people to precisely to instill this culture of truth, no, a culture that will fight fake news and disinformation. Kasi it's the norm now. Ito na yung norm. Hindi na to trend, no. So we've seen it for a few election cycles now, no. So we cannot act as if ngayon lang nangyari to, no? So yung curriculum natin, I think we should take a look and maybe integrate lessons, modules, no, that put a premium on news, no, and appreciating, no, for instance, the difference between news and opinion, no, the value of journalism in a and the free press in democracy, no. So nakakalimutan yun I think, and which is why we have a situation in which there seems to be a wedge, no, or a wall between journalists, no, the news media and the audience, no, or certain segments of the audience, no. Of course, meron pa ring parts ng audience na very receptive, no, pagdating sa news. But we can see na maraming galit sa mainstream media, no. And then marami ring mga troll armies, no. For all we know, mga pakawala rin to ng mga political operators, no, precisely with the objective of undermining the credibility of journalists, no. So in that regard, we really just have to fight back, no, and fight disinformation and misinformation with the truth.
Right? May importanteng nabanggit si Professor, no? Education. Yan yung isang mahalagang foundation na dapat gamitin in this battle. Halimbawa, yesterday, we celebrated the 36th year since the Marcos dictatorship fell. No? Pero in that 36 years, hindi na ipasok sa ating curriculum yung martial law years. 36 years. So, in a way, our educational system failed, no, in explaining to a younger generation who now comprise about 54% of voters what really happened 36 years ago. Either hindi pa sila ipinapanganak o mga bata pa sila, pero hindi na ipaliwanag sa kanila through our educational system, no, what happened during the martial law years. How many have died, how many have plundered, no? Halimbawa, how many have been recovered? Billions of pesos have been recovered. So, paano mo sasabihin na walang nangyaring pagnanakaw? But that was natabunan of a false narrative. At isa sa mga culprits dyan is our educational system. No? Kailangan mas i-improve, mas sumama sa labanang ito for truth and integrity na konektado rin sa democracy. No?
Lastly, Professor Salvosa and Mr. Llamas, just to wrap this up, we have lots to talk about, but sadly we don't have the time. What can COMELEC do in the meantime? Because these education reforms will take time. But for the time being, can the COMELEC regulate? And I know that they have released social media guidelines, and they now require social media influencers or those who actually post for a certain candidate to do finance reporting. But is that enough?
For me, it's not enough. No. So, well, there's this recently released study by the Rappler research team. No, one of the suggestions is to consider disinformation, fake news, misinformation as a form of electoral fraud. No, so well, it will require legislation. But I think that's one idea worth exploring. No. Siguro hindi pa siya we cannot have acceptance of that kind of regulation today. But going forward, we should look at if there's a proven connection between a candidate and misinformation, I think that should be treated as an election offense. I agree with that finding by the Rappler research team.
All right, Mr. Llamas.
With 2.5 months and with the COMELEC as it is now, I doubt kung magagawa nila yan. No? Kaya mahalaga, halimbawa itong SIM bill na ito na inaprubahan na ng House at saka ng Senate, sana mapirmahan na. Dahil meron itong chilling effect dito sa mga anonymous influencers, bloggers, troll farms who try to manipulate voters with a deluge of information, memes, and fake news. So, ito sana ay in the next 2.5 months, ito yung pwedeng makatulong at maka-influensya. Now, instead of the COMELEC. Yung COMELEC, yung implementation nga ng kanilang existing laws, nahihirapan. So ito yung immediately kayang gawin. Pero pressure din sa mga platforms like Facebook, like Twitter, pressure sila ay very vulnerable din sila. They adjust. No, halimbawa, sa US, tinanggal nila si Trump sa Twitter. No? That can be done. No? A very powerful person like Trump. In 2019, nagtanggal sila ng mga platforms na sabi ng Facebook are connected with the armed forces of the Philippines and connected with China. No? Ibig sabihin, kayang gawin eh. No? Kayang gawin kung yung mga journalists, yung mga fact-checkers at mga karaniwang tao ay magtutulungan. No? Para labanan yung fake narratives na yan, yung manipulative strategies na yan. But I doubt in 2.5 months and COMELEC as it is, ay may magagawa sila o may gusto silang gawin.
All right. On that note, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, former political advisor Ronald Llamas and USC professor Felipe Salvosa.
Maraming salamat, Mike.
Thank you.